Hi, my name is Julie. I am a licensed professional counselor in South Carolina, and this is my co-counselor, Ed. Today we're going to be continuing on with the exploration of Brenè Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart. We're going to be covering today the chapter that she titles The Places We Go When We're Hurting. Sit back and let's learn about this together. Welcome back. I have jumped back up into my chair and Ed's on his break from his filming experience, and we're going to carry on with our exploration into the emotions that we experience when we're hurting. So in this chapter, Brenè covers anguish and despair, hopelessness, sadness, and grief. It's going to be a fun one. But these are emotions that we all experience, unfortunately, and fortunately, at one time or another. We're going to start with anguish. Anguish is one of those emotions that was described by Brenè and by poets as feeling just like it sounds. It's that exhalation of pain. It's often grouped together with other emotions like sadness, but it's nothing like them. It's separate from them. Although sadness can be a part of anguish, it's an unbearable and traumatic swirl of shock, incredulity, grief, with a sense of powerlessness at the same time. Like, I can't make anything change in this situation. So anguish is a sense of shock. It's heartbreak. It's this foreboding. I don't want to move any closer to it, and I certainly don't want to relive it. It's a physical crumpling to the ground. And we often experience anguish as a part of grief, as that initial shock of the news of grief. As a matter of fact, I remember when my grandmother passed away, and I was living in Florida and she passed away up in Toronto, Ontario in Canada. And I got the phone call that she had gone in ill to the hospital. She had a pulmonary embolism, and then I got the phone call that she died. And I remember going to get a shower to get cleaned up because we were going to load into the car and head up to Ontario. And I just physically crumpled in the shower in anguish, sobbing. I can feel the pain when I think about it. And it's one of those emotions that we do feel again when we think about that moment. Not to the same degree. We don't lose our bones, but we do remember the feeling. Anguish is unlike any other. Sometimes we need help to find our way back, to reclaim our breath, to process our feelings, and also to get our bones back. And so we need to work with a counselor to help to move back, or process with a friend or with another loved one. That's what the grieving process is about, to move back after this anguish that we have felt when we have physically crumpled during a situation. Hopelessness is the next emotion that Brenè Brown covers in this particular chapter. And to fully understand hopelessness, she actually presents hope initially. And hope, to feel hope, we have to be able to set realistic goals, to be flexible, to be able to bounce back, to have the agency that is required if we meet up with obstacles, to be able to push through. And the agency to believe that we can. So in order to have hope present, we have to have those things present. Hopelessness arrives, of course, when we don't have those things in place, and it leads to feelings of desperation, and it threatens our well-being. It's a combination of life events and negative thought patterns and self-blame with a perceived inability to change anything. I don't know what I want or even how to get it. Maybe we try once or twice to make some changes, but we can't do anything. We find out very quickly that we can't, and we don't believe truly that we can make any changes. Hopelessness is highly correlated with suicidal ideation, and completed suicide. So as a counselor, if I have somebody in front of me who has high levels of hopelessness, we're going to process those things. I'm going to ask some more questions. And it does apply to each situation. Hopelessness is situational. Despair is like hopelessness in that there's a sense of hopelessness, but it is a sense of hopelessness about everything. So in despair, I don't have any hope in my life or in my future or in my living situation changing or my education changing or my job or, nothing is going to change. I have no hope in any area of my life, so I sink into despair. It combines with extreme sadness, and there's the belief that tomorrow will be bad, just like it is now. And we don't see an ending in it. Nothing's ever going to change. It's never going to be good. That's despair. Despair and hopelessness are parts of depression, but they aren't depression. We need practices to bring us back. What do we really want? We need to reality check our situation. We need to build skills over time, and all of these things we can do in connection with another person, whether it's a healthy friend or family member, or perhaps a mental health counselor can help us with that as well. There are 3 P's that Brenè Brown addresses that can be contributors to hopelessness and despair, and they're personalization, it's hard for me to say, permanence, and pervasiveness. Personalization contributes to hopelessness and despair because we feel like we are the problem and we can't see any outside factors. We feel like we really need to have our behavior seen in context rather than it's because of me, nothing is going to change because I just don't have the skills necessary. We maybe need somebody else to look at the situation and help us assess it, assistance to do so. That permanence, that P, feeling like the struggle is never going to end. Tomorrow is going to be no different from today. So Brenè started to practice, and I do something very similar. I like the way that she presented it. She habitually asks ourselves, if I'm scared, worried, overwhelmed, stressed, insert your negative emotion here. She asks herself, what's going on? Will this still be a big deal in 5 minutes? In 5 hours? In 5 days? In 5 weeks? In 5 years? Is what's going on now really permanent the way I'm viewing it through my mind? Remember, these 3 P's. I don't want to pee all over myself in the situation. I want to be able to assess this. And the pervasiveness. When we're down, pervasiveness says nothing good is left. And what I want you to look at is that really true? Is nothing good really left? I have people sit in front of me and they say, my whole life is terrible. And then we explore different things that they have told me. Maybe they have told me stories about their grandchild or their dog or another family member or a friend, and they have joy in these areas, right? So we need to be able to pick out those little glimmers. It's not as through my life as I initially thought. So are you peeing on yourself? Are you engaging in these 3 P's? Because they are contributors to hopelessness and despair. Do that self-check when you are experiencing those emotions. The next emotion that Brenè covers in this particular chapter is sadness. And she has a list of sad movies. I'd be interested to find out what are your sad movies, your go-to sad movies. List them down below in the comments. But she references a lot of them. The ones that come to my mind, Up. Even the beginning of Up. Marley and Me was a sad movie to me. That rolling video montage where Marley is doing all of these different things and the life goes by so quickly. It actually makes me tear up right now thinking about it. The life that goes by so quickly. Any movie where a dog dies, of course, is sad to me. What movie makes you sad? And she talked about the fact that we actually like sad movies and explores why is it that we enjoy these sad movies. It's because we like to connect to that emotion. We like to feel connected to other individuals, to know that we're not alone in our sadness, that other people have felt sadness over the same things. And so it's actually a connecting emotion, which is very interesting. So there are, sadness and depression. We need to understand they're not the same. And although sadness and sad disposition is sometimes referred to as depression, it is very different than depression. Depression is a cluster of symptoms that we see over time. There's a loss of interest in daily activities that people used to love to do. There may be a loss of appetite or overeating. There's fatigue and insomnia and difficulty concentrating, and typically comes along with hopelessness and high suicidal ideation. So sadness and depression are different. I hope that you can see that. And if you're experiencing the symptoms of depression, please reach out to a mental health counselor. Sadness and grief are not the same, although sadness is a part of grief. We're going to be exploring grief in a moment. There are positive and negative aspects of sadness. Sad people are actually less prone to judgment, and they make better eyewitnesses because they see things more realistically. Sad people also tend to be a little bit more generous. Maybe it's because they want other people to feel better. And the interesting thing, when we give, when we're feeling sad, it can lift our own spirits too. So that connection in that giving is very good for us as well. And of course, the reason that those sad movies really impact us, I covered a little bit earlier, it's because we feel connected to other people in our sadness. Then we have grief. I'm going to read a quote, and this is from page 110 in her book, and it's a quote by Elizabeth Gilbert. Grief does not obey your plans or your wishes. Grief will do whatever it wants to you, whenever it wants to. In that regard, grief has a lot in common with love. And it really does. Grief is a process of many emotions. It doesn't really stand alone. It's kind of an attempt to make sense of my world as it is now after my loss. It's a loss and a longing and a feeling lost all together. There's this loss, and when we think of grief, we think of the death of a loved one, and that is absolutely grief. That's your picture postcard of what grief is when we lose somebody we love. But there are other pieces of grief. Loss of normality, which we experienced during COVID. Loss of what could be in a situation because of choices that people made, and so we lost something that we really wanted to have carry on. Maybe it's relationship choices made by the other person in our relationship. They chose something that caused us to have to end the relationship. So we've got that loss of what could be, loss of what we knew of someone. When we find out some devastating news about somebody else's choices, that's a loss in how we view that individual. And it's that the longing that comes along with that really isn't a conscious wanting. It's more of an involuntary yearning. It's an involuntary yearning for wholeness and understanding and meaning. We want to touch what we've lost. We want to go back to what we've lost. We don't want to have to readjust. We feel lost. Everything is different from the way it was before. Grief doesn't really end either. We adapt to the loss. We learn to function differently. Grief isn't over. Although we're not always sad, grief finds a place within us, and we learn to move differently as a result. On page 111, she says, I keep thinking back to a conversation I had on unblocking us with the grief expert David Kessler. I'll never forget him saying this. Each person's grief is as unique as their fingerprint, but what everyone has in common is that no matter how they grieve, they share a need for their grief to be witnessed. That doesn't mean needing someone to try to lessen or reframe it for them. The need is for someone to be fully present to the magnitude of their loss without trying to point out any silver lining. If that does not happen when somebody experiences loss, then that acute grief, that early grief that is experienced, doesn't get to be integrated, which is the adaptation to the loss that we experienced when we integrate our grief into our daily life. And we can then experience a complicated grief. When something interferes with the grieving process, I enter into a complicated grief where I stay in acute grief for a longer period of time, and I will likely need assistance to move out of that complicated grief to be able to integrate my grief. There is another type of grief, it's called disenfranchised grief. And in disenfranchised grief, my grief isn't always recognized by society. It may be the loss through a miscarriage, or the loss of a relationship, the loss of a friendship, the loss of an animal. We can experience disenfranchised grief in those situations. And so we may need, again, somebody to talk with in order to process these things. But all of these emotions are ones that we experience. They're places we go when we're hurting. None of us will avoid these emotions. We're going to experience them through life. And so I hope that this video covering these emotions that Brenè Brown covers helps you to gain some understanding into what you feel and why. Please let me know in the comments if you've connected with any of these emotions, when you felt these different things, and how you moved through these emotions, who you connected with. I know Grief Share is a phenomenal program that I'm actually leading at our local church here on Thursday nights, and it is a place for people to come and express their grief, to talk about their loved ones, to be able to move from that acute grief to integrated grief. And there's lots of sadness. There's anguish, there's longing, there's hurting, and there's sadness, but we are there together. We are supporting one another. I hope that you have support in your life as you walk your road. You're always welcome back here. I hope to support you in any way that I possibly can. Reach out, put a note in the comments, shoot me an email. I'd love to hear from you. And until next time, I just want you to know that whatever you do, whatever you're feeling, you are welcome here at Orange Therapy, just as you are.